Welcome to the Madison Miller Podcast. Today is Tuesday, April 7th, 2020. Today I'm going to recap the latest news within the coronavirus. A bunch of things I want to get to in there that are promising. The all-decade team for the NFL came out yesterday, and I made my own, and I'm going to compare my own to the one that the NFL released. My 2017 NFL ReDraft and my 2018 top 10 songs. All right, we'll start with the coronavirus. The biggest news to come out from yesterday was reported around 12:30 a.m. last night by ESPN's Jeff Passan, and I think this is the most promising bit of news that we've had since sports have been canceled. Passan reports that Major League Baseball and the MLBPA are focusing on a plan backed by federal health officials that could have players in training camps by May and games soon thereafter. This is huge for sports, big time for baseball, and they're obviously going to be doing some testing with the players, and the fact that the federal health officials are going to back this is big time as well, and maybe we'll see sports sooner than many people anticipate. And I think this is very, very, very promising in terms of the idea that sports may be back sooner rather than later. And the return may be in Arizona to kick it off, which isn't a bad idea. They're going to use spring training facilities and Chase Stadium where the Diamondbacks play. And I think that they should do that just for the regular season. And then for the playoffs, let's say the NFL starts in time with fans. So for the playoffs, baseball should absolutely go to their home stadiums with fans, assuming that everything's okay by then for the postseason only. But this is, like I said, humongous news. And hopefully this is something that comes in through fruition. And other promising news we had yesterday, I talked about the Masters being in November, but the PGA announced that they want to restart in June. And if I had to make a prediction, I think that may be the first sport to come back, and maybe baseball at the end of June. So the British Open canceled. The PGA Championship in San Francisco would be August 3rd through the 9th. The FedEx Cup, the U.S. Open, would be September 14th through the 20th. And the Masters from Augusta would be November 9th through the 15th. And they really want to get things back underway in June. They're waiting on a possible PGA Tour event from June 15th to the 21st. And if they get back in mid-June, that is humongous for sports. And yesterday, Adam Silver spoke to TNT's and NBA TV's Ernie Johnson. And he said that the NBA will not have a real answer about resuming the season until at least May 1st. And this obviously broke before the news about baseball coming back, potentially. I think that if baseball comes back, then absolutely basketball and hockey will come back as well. And the hot rumor is that the NBA are going to do like a quarantine style, either overseas in like Hawaii or something like that, or in Las Vegas at the facilities of the Summer League, and do neutral site games and single elimination playoff games potentially. Single elimination playoff games is, I think, something I'd be in favor of. Obviously, in game ones and series, sometimes you see unexpected upsets and then result into nothing as the favored team ends up winning in 5 or 6 games, or sometimes even 7. We saw an example of this last year. Let's say if they did a single elimination tournament last year in the NBA playoffs, then the team that won the championship, the Toronto Raptors, would have lost in the first round to the Magic. Imagine that type of scenario happening in the NBA playoffs in the single elimination game. That's what makes it so enticing. It's like the NCAA tournament in that retrospect. And even for hockey, like, I know Columbus wound up sweeping Tampa Bay, but let's say Tampa Bay ended up winning that series in 5, 6, or 7 games, and then Columbus, let's say if it, that's how it actually happened, but Columbus would win game 1, and then if it's a single elimination tournament, Columbus wins game 1, they win that game and move on to the next round. So the idea of a single elimination tournament within the NBA and then potentially the NHL would be crazy. And Major League Baseball, I think, could be some upset prone as well in terms of a single elimination tournament. It's like the wild card game. Like, you have that in baseball, the one-game elimination game. But let's say if Major League Baseball did it this past year in the playoffs, so the Yankees would have advanced, and say if it was the ALCS, the Yankees won game 1 against Houston, so the Yankees would have been in the World Series if the ALCS was a one-game series, and in the NLCS, obviously the Nationals swept the card, so the World Series would have been Yankees-Nationals last year if they did a single elimination tournament, if you think about it, because the Yankees won game 1 against the Twins. The Nationals won the wild card game. Did they win game 1 against the Dodgers, the Nats? I really don't remember if they did or not. But if they did, which I don't remember if they did or not, I have to double check if they won the game 1 against the Dodgers last year or not. But if they did, let's say they did, then it would have been Yankees-Nationals. So I'm going to double check this now. I know they won in 5 against the Los Angeles Dodgers. So let's see. Game 1. Who won that game? The Dodgers. 6-0. So the Dodgers would have played the Yankees in the ALCS instead of the Nats. So, or I'm sorry, the World Series instead of the Nats. And the World Series would have been potentially Yankees-Dodgers, or who won game 1 between the Cards and Atlanta? I think it was the Cardinals. Yeah, the Cardinals won a classic game 1, 7-6. They scored 4 in the 9th, and Atlanta scored 3. So it would have been Cardinals-Dodgers in the ALCS again, and then, or in the NLCS, and the ALCS would have been the Yankees against Houston. And then the Yankees won game 1, and then whoever would have won a potential play-in for the World Series game against the Dodgers or the Cardinals would have played the Yankees in the World Series. So I kind of like the idea of single elimination tournaments and the gambling aspect to that and the possible upsets that could happen. So I'm all for a single elimination tournaments, and there's been talks about that in Major League Baseball as well. And one more coronavirus thing that I want to discuss is that 3 of the 4 major news networks are coming together. CBS, ABC, and NBC are coming together to air One World Together at Home Saturday, April 18th. So that is 11 or 12 days from now. It'll be Kimmel, Fallon, and Colbert will co-host, and it will be on a broadcast in more than a dozen cable channels, YouTube, radio, etc. This is awesome. The Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, and Stephen Colbert will be doing this together. I love this idea. They're all great at what they do. I wonder if they're going to have performances or any other random guests on. You're seeing all the celebrities come together of late and doing something, so that's kind of neat. And then obviously we're going to talk about Kimmel tomorrow because Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Celebrity Edition will be airing tomorrow night at 10 o'clock on ABC, so I'm going to touch on that on tomorrow's podcast. Now I'm going to talk about my NFL All-Decade team and compare it to the All-Decade team from the NFL. All right, my NFL All-Decade team. Quarterback, Tom Brady. There's no other choice for this. I'm sorry. You won a lot of Super Bowls, and I'm saying you as in Tom Brady. He won a lot of Super Bowls, and he lost a couple Super Bowls, but not his fault. Not his fault that Nick Foles went on a magical run. Not his fault that they lost to the Giants in 2012. Running backs, Adrian Peterson and LaShawn McCoy. I felt that these were the best two running backs of the decade. Peterson obviously won an MVP with the Vikings. McCoy helped Philly, Buffalo, and the Chiefs the last few years. Wide receivers. This one was really, really tough because there are obviously four major candidates for this, and I chose three. Calvin Johnson, Antonio Brown, and Julio Jones. And I left off DeAndre Hopkins. That's my honorable mention wide receiver. It was very deep. Those four were obviously the best four receivers of the decade. Calvin Johnson obviously retired very early in his career. That really did set the Lions back now looking back. Antonio Brown was a great receiver. He obviously wants to come back into the league. There's rumors that he was going to join Brady on the Bucs. But Arians doesn't want him there, and Arians and him had issues in Pittsburgh when Arians was there. And Julio Jones of the Falcons, who makes highlight reel plays and really has helped the Falcons over the past decade. Tight end, no doubt about it, Rob Gronkowski, the best tight end arguably of all time. It's unfortunate he had a lot of injuries throughout his career, but he certainly was the best tight end of the decade. If I had some honorable mentions, Jimmy Graham, Tony Gonzalez retired early in the decade, so I wouldn't really consider him. Travis Kelce's an honorable mention. George Kittle didn't really break out till the end of the decade, so the obvious answer here would be Gronk. Offensive tackles, Jason Peters and Tyron Smith. Both those players certainly helped their respective teams in the NFC East, the Cowboys and the Eagles, to where they are now, and those are obviously two home run draft picks by their respective front offices. Honorable mention to Joe Thomas, formerly of the Cleveland Browns, but Joe Thomas, great player, but he had to leave somebody off, just like I had to leave off DeAndre Hopkins for wide receiver. Guards, Marshall Yanda of the Ravens and Zach Martin of the Cowboys. There's a lot of good guards in the league, and I had to leave some good ones off. Martin really has been a mainstay in the Cowboys' offensive line since Jerry Jones and company drafted him with the 17th overall pick in 2014 after many thought that they were going to pick Johnny Manziel there. And Marshall Yanda of the Ravens really has been a backbone of that offensive line, helping protect Joe Flacco and now Lamar Jackson. And center Marquise Pouncey. He's somebody that is still a good lineman. He bounced around a little bit. Steelers, I remember he was injured one year, and that pretty much derailed the Steelers' season. I believe that was the 2013 season, and the Steelers were 8-8, but if they didn't lose Pouncey, maybe they go 10-6, 11-5, and make the playoffs and go on another deep run. Defense. Defensive ends, J.J. Watt and Khalil Mack. Watt obviously has been a mainstay on the Texans' pass rush over this past decade and helped them go to the postseason a lot of years under Bill O'Brien. And Khalil Mack, somebody that the Raiders probably should have never traded away in retrospect, but they did do a good job in that deal. They got Josh Jacobs for one of the picks, and then the other first-round pick is pending, so that trade is still a TBD for the Raiders, and it's still a TBD for the Bears. The Bears haven't won anything with Khalil Mack. They made the playoffs his first year there, but they lost because of the double doink kick, and then obviously that trade looks bad right now because of Mitch Trubisky not panning out to the quarterback the Bears thought. But maybe Nick Foles goes in there and looks like Philly Nick Foles with some of the ex-Eagles/Chiefs coaching staff with the Bears now. Nick Foles knew Nagy from Philly and from KC. So maybe Foles thrives there. They win the division. That division's weaker now than it was the last couple years with Rodgers getting up there in age and has been injury prone a little bit the last few years. Although he stayed healthy last year, they made the playoffs, but they were exposed in the NFC Championship game against the Niners. Vikings lost a lot of pieces, obviously, in free agency, but they still have a chance to replace some of their departed players in the draft, and they have 2 first-round picks. And they're certainly a sneaky candidate to trade one of those picks for a player that's unhappy, like a Chris Jones or something with KC. Just throw that out as an example. But, yeah, certainly that NFC North is more open than it was the last couple years. So maybe the Bears make a run. That Khalil Mack trade ends up looking like a good deal. Outside linebackers, Von Miller and Justin Houston. Justin Houston was a stud in his heyday with the Chiefs, and then he went over to the Colts and really didn't look like the same guy. Von Miller's been a stud with the Broncos this past decade, helping them to 2 Super Bowl appearances and leading them to a big win over the Panthers, earning him the big Super Bowl MVP honors. Luke Kuechly and Bobby Wagner for the inside linebackers. Kuechly helped the Panthers big time, helped lead them to the Super Bowl. Now he's retired. Bobby Wagner, still a mainstay on that Seahawks defense. He's pretty much the only person from that Legion of Boom era on that defense that's really still around. Cornerbacks, Richard Sherman and Darrelle Revis. Revis obviously no longer in the league. He was a stud with the Jets in the beginning of his career. Then the Jets traded him away to the Bucks. And then the Bucks, I believe, released him. And then he went to New England, and then he was a free agent, and then he won a Super Bowl with the Pats, and then he went back to the Jets, and then his skills really started to deteriorate there at the end of that second Jets tenure, but still on the better corners of the decade. Richard Sherman, probably the best corner of the decade, helped lead the Seahawks to back-to-back Super Bowls, including the win over the Broncos. Now the 49ers helped them go to a Super Bowl and was one of the best corners in the league last year. Many people thought that Sherman was washed up. I thought he was a player in decline. I didn't necessarily think he was washed up, but he certainly proved me wrong last year, and he's still an elite corner today. And then the free safety Earl Thomas, currently of the Ravens, formerly of the Seahawks, and Cam Chancellor, somebody who I don't think is in the league anymore, if I'm not mistaken. He's obviously somebody that, not in the league anymore. But he was a huge, huge part of that Legion of Boom defense. An honorable mention, obviously, to Eric Weddle, currently of the Rams. And special teams. Kicker Justin Tucker of the Ravens. Punter was a tough one. I settled on the ex-49ers punter Andy Lee, who was very good in the first half of the decade. And then the second half of the decade's best punter really was up for grabs. So I decided to go with Andy Lee, the ex-Niners punter. And a punt returner, kick returner, I went with Patrick Peterson of the Cardinals. And honorable mentions to Tyreek Hill and Cordell Patterson and Tariq Cohen. And special teamer, Matthew Slater of the Patriots. And now the NFL's version of their all-decade team. I think that they did a nice job. Quarterbacks, they went with Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. If I had a second choice at quarterback, I would have gone with Drew Brees over Aaron Rodgers. But that's only because Rodgers got hurt a lot at the end of the decade. Although the case for Rodgers over Brees is because the Saints weren't good in the middle of the decade and then they became good again. But they didn't suck because of Drew Brees. They sucked because of their defense. So that's not Drew Brees' fault. that the Saints sucked in the middle of the decade, and Aaron Rodgers was injured a lot through the decade, so I would have picked Drew Brees over Aaron Rodgers. Wide receivers, they went Antonio Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, Calvin Johnson, and Julio Jones. I would go Hopkins over Fitzgerald only because Fitzgerald was on a bunch of bad teams with the Cardinals, other than in the middle of the decade where Carson Palmer magically turned into a great quarterback under Bruce Arians. But I would have went with Hopkins instead of Fitzgerald. Tight ends, Gronk and Kelsey. I think that's correct, although you could argue Jimmy Graham for that second spot, but Graham really has declined over the past 4 or 5 years, ever since he left New Orleans. So I think they went with the right choice there with Travis Kelsey of the Chiefs. Tackles, they went Jason Peters, Tyron Smith, Joe Staley, and Joe Thomas. Staley is another good one, but he's getting up there in age. Obviously, he helped the Niners big time in the Jim Harbaugh era. Guards, they went with Jariah Evans, Logan Mankins, Marshall Yanda, and Zach Martin. Evans and Mankins have been good guards for their respective teams as well. Centers, they went Marquise Pouncey and Alex Mack. Mack, obviously, a very good center in his heyday. Running backs, they went Adrian Peterson, LaShawn McCoy, Marshawn Lynch, and Frank Gore. Those were all good running backs. Lynch, I think you can make a case should be the number 2 running back, but I went with McCoy on my list. And then Frank Gore, obviously, had a great career at the 49ers. And then their flex back, Darren Sproles, now of the Eagles, formerly of the Saints. Punters, they went with Johnny Hecker and Shane Leckler. Kickers, they went with Gostkowski and Justin Tucker. Punt returners, Tyreek Hill and Darren Sproles. And kick returners, Devin Hester and Cardell Patterson. And then defense, they went with the ends. They went with Calais Campbell, Cameron Jordan, Julius Peppers, and J.J. Watt. My question is, where's Khalil Mack on the defensive ends? But we'll get to Mack. That was my initial question. Defensive tackles, they went Aaron Donald, Ndamukong Suh, Fletcher Cox, and Geno Atkins. Inside linebackers, Luke Kuechly, Bobby Wagner, and Patrick Willis. Patrick Willis is a good pick. And then outside linebackers, here's Khalil Mack, and they took him with Von Miller and Chandler Jones. Corners, Patrick Peterson, Darrelle Revis, and Richard Sherman. Safeties, Eric Berry, Earl Thomas, and Eric Weddle. Defensive backs, Tyrann Mathieu and Chris Harris. And then the 2 coaches, they picked Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll. I would have gone Belichick and Andy Reid over Pete Carroll, only because Reid got a lot out of those Chiefs teams pre-Mahomes and got a lot out of Alex Smith. I understand the argument for Pete Carroll, 2 Super Bowl appearances, 1 Super Bowl win. So Chiefs versus Seahawks, Reid versus Carroll, certainly an interesting conversation. But the Seahawks, if I'm not mistaken, made the playoffs every year this decade, except 2011, and that was obviously the season that the 49ers broke out under Jim Harbaugh, and that was a lockout year, and they didn't have like the proper OTAs and whatnot, but that's no excuse. They still had a full season. So that was the only year the Seahawks didn't make the playoffs in the decade. And the Chiefs, I believe, made the postseason almost every year in the decade except that year, 2011, and 2012. And then they made it in 2010 under Matt Castle. So I understand why they chose Pete Carroll over Andy Reid, but I would have gone with Andy Reid because Pete Carroll had a lot of talent on those teams. And Andy Reid, pre-Mahomes Chiefs teams, he got a lot out of those teams and got a lot out of Alex Smith for sure. Now I'm going to do my 2017 NFL redraft. There's a lot of what ifs in this draft, obviously, so without further ado, here we go. Number 1, Cleveland Browns, Patrick Mahomes. Is there any doubt here? No. Obviously, Mahomes, the best player in that draft by a mile. It was the obvious choice here. The Browns took Myles Garrett. I understood why at the time that they took him because he was the best player in the draft perceived-wise, but now looking back, the best player in that draft was indeed Mahomes. Number 2, Chicago Bears, Deshaun Watson. Obviously, they took Mitch Trubisky in this spot, and he's been a bust compared to the other 2 quarterbacks in Mahomes and Watson. So the Bears take Watson here. Imagine if they had Watson instead of Trubisky. They probably would have won the division the last couple of years. And maybe not in 17 because Watson tore his ACL, but he certainly would have given them hope that year as well. Number 3, San Francisco 49ers, Ryan Ramczyk. Obviously, Ramczyk, one of the best offensive linemen in the league. A part of that loaded draft class the Saints had that year. They took Solomon Thomas, who's been one of the bigger busts over the last couple of years in that spot. 4, Jacksonville Jaguars, George Kittle, one of the biggest steals of this draft, and the Niners took him in the 5th round, and now he's one of the best tight ends in the league. The Jaguars took Leonard Fournette in this spot. 5, Tennessee Titans, Myles Garrett. So the Titans land the guy that went number 1 overall. Would have been a steal in this spot. Number 6, New York Jets, Jamal Adams, the first no do-over of the redraft as the Jets take their guy in Jamal Adams. Number 7, Los Angeles Chargers, or they were San Diego at the time, weren't they? No, they were Los Angeles. It was their first draft as the Los Angeles Chargers. TJ Watt, the brother of JJ Watt, the Steelers landed him at the end of the 1st round, looking like one of the better draft steals of this draft. And imagine TJ Watt with Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram and that pass rush. Oh my goodness. 8, the Carolina Panthers, Christian McCaffrey. No do-over here as the Panthers take CMC to help run their offense. 9, the Cincinnati Bengals, Marshawn Lattimore, one of the better corners in the league. Won the Defensive Rookie of the Year. And then has been a good Saint these last couple of years. 10, Chiefs, Tre'Davious White. The Chiefs get a steal here with White. It stinks that they don't get their quarterback in Mahomes, but they get a nice consolation prize sorta with White, and obviously at the time Alex Smith was still on their roster. 11, New Orleans Saints, Marcus Williams. So with Lattimore off the board, the Saints take somebody that they drafted in the 2nd round, Williams, who's been one of the better safeties in the league, that is obviously remembered for his missed tackle on Stephon Diggs, which led to that game-winning touchdown that sent the Vikings to the NFC title game. 12, the Houston Texans, Chris Godwin. So the Texans get a mega steal here with Godwin, and then they imagine Godwin and Hopkins in the same team at the time, but they didn't have the quarterback at the time. They probably had Ryan Fitzpatrick at the time on their roster, but they trade up for Watson, obviously. 13, Arizona Cardinals, Juju Smith-Schuster. This is another huge steal for the Cardinals. Larry Fitzgerald and Juju Smith-Schuster in the same offense. And at the time, I think they had Carson Palmer. 14, Philadelphia Eagles, Alvin Kamara. Oh my goodness. Imagine Carson Wentz, Alvin Kamara, and all those guys in that offense. Obviously, Ertz, the tight end, as well. Wow. That would be a nice loaded offense with a good line, too. 15, Indianapolis Colts, Dalvin Cook. This would have been a good pick at the time because Andrew Luck was healthy at the time and still playing in the league. So that would have been a nice weapon for him. 16, Baltimore Ravens, Marlon Humphrey. So the Ravens don't do a do-over here as they take their guy in Humphrey. 17, Washington Redskins, Leonard Fournette. So instead of signing an old Adrian Peterson, they take a promising back in Fournette, who falls all the way to 17 here. And the Redskins took Jonathan Allen in this spot. And by the way, 15, the Colts took Malik Hooker. Philly took Barnett. Cardinals took Hassan Reddick, bust. Bengals at 9 took John Ross, bust. Chargers at 7 took Mike Williams. Bust. All right, where did I leave off? 18, Tennessee Titans, Garrett Bowles. A good offensive lineman for the Titans here, who really the Broncos, I think, was an underrated draft pick. Nobody talks about Garrett Bowles in terms of good draft picks from this class, but he's a very, very solid player, and he certainly would have helped the Titans on that line. 19, the Buccaneers, and by the way, the Titans at 18 took Adoree Jackson. 19, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Kenny Golladay. With Chris Godwin off the board, they decided to go with one of the more underrated receivers in Golladay, who the Lions stole in one of the later rounds in this draft. I believe it was the second or third round. Boy, that would have been a really good pick. Golladay, Mike Evans in the same offense, and at the time it was Jameis. And at this spot they took O.J. Howard. 20, Denver Broncos, Cooper Kupp. So with Garrett Bowles off the board, the Broncos go with Cooper Kupp. They'll load up on offense, so they would have had at the time Emmanuel Sanders and Cooper Kupp in that offense in Denver. And Demaryius Thomas. 21, the Lions, James Conner. This would have been a nice pick. He would have certainly helped the Lions and Matthew Stafford, as Kenny Galladay's off the board, and then the guy they took in the spot, Jarrad Davis, has been a huge bust. 22, the Miami Dolphins, Kareem Hunt. So they go with the running back here. They took in this spot Charles Harris, who really hasn't done anything in the league. 23, the New York Giants, Budda Baker. This would have been a steal for them. In this spot, they took Evan Ingram, who's a nice player, but somebody that's been injury prone. But Budda Baker certainly would have helped their defense. 24, Oakland Raiders, Adoree Jackson. So Jackson falls to 24. The Raiders take him. In this spot, they took Garyon Connolly, who was a bust. 25, Cleveland Browns, Eddie Jackson. Probably one of the biggest steals of this redraft. Eddie Jackson is somebody that had one great season in 2018, but his other two seasons weren't as good as that one. That's why he's this low. Somebody said that he should have been a top 10, but that was obviously a Bears fan saying that. So I feel that Eddie Jackson's not as great as that person obviously thinks. And Eddie Jackson I have going at the end of the first round here at 25. And the Browns in the spot took Jabril Peppers. 26, Atlanta Falcons, Shaq Griffin. One of the bigger steals in this draft from the Seahawks. Someone that certainly would have helped the Falcons in that secondary. It would have been him and obviously Desmond Trufant at the time. And in this spot, they took Takaris McKinley. Number 27, Buffalo Bills, Dalvin Thompson. This is somebody that really has been underrated. A good D lineman on the New York Giants. There's been trade rumors around Tomlinson. He's been somebody that has been very, very solid as a starter for them these past couple of years. And in this spot, they took the Pro Bowler Tre'Davious White, who I had going number 10. Number 28, the Dallas Cowboys. Taco Charlton was the actual pick, but here I have him taking Malik Hooker. Somebody that would have really helped their secondary. Hooker's somebody that's a nice player, but somebody that hasn't made a Pro Bowl yet. I have him dropping the 28, and they took Taco Charlton at 28, who was a bust. 29, the Cleveland Browns. Gerald Everett. Somebody that the Rams stole in the second round of the draft. The tight end. And in this spot, the Browns took David Njoku, another tight end, who probably doesn't have a starting job right now because of the signing of Austin Hooper. But yeah, so the Brown St. Gerald Everett, so now is a solid contributor these last couple of years with the Rams. 30 Pittsburgh Steelers, Derek Barnett with TJ Watt off the board. They go with Derek Barnett, who obviously made the big strip sack fumble play in the Super Bowl against Tom Brady and the Patriots. But other than that, he hasn't had a special moment, although he's been a solid player for Philly. Number 31, the 49ers, Jabril Peppers. So the Niners take the defensive back that the Browns took a couple spots earlier in the ReDraft, that is currently now with the New York Giants after the Browns packaged Peppers in that Odell Beckham Jr. trade. And Peppers would have been someone that would have helped the Niners. And 32, the New Orleans Saints, Joe Mixon, with Alvin Kamara off the board. And with Ryan Ramczyk off the board, they go with a solid running back in Joe Mixon. He would have been very good on the Saints, I think. I don't know if he would have been as good as Kamara. Maybe he would have had similar production because of the good offensive line that he would have been surrounded by, even though I don't have Ramczyk to the Saints in this redraft. But he still would have been behind a good enough line to produce for the New Orleans Saints. Now I'm going to do my top 10 songs of 2018. This is one that I was looking forward to doing. So without further ado, here we go. Honorable mentions: Thunder by Imagine Dragons, Girl Like You by Maroon 5 featuring Cardi B, Meant to Be, BB Rexa featuring Florida Georgia Line, and In My Blood by Shawn Mendes. So now without further ado, here you have my top 10 songs of 2018. Number 10, Delicate, Taylor Swift, released March 12th of 2018, an electro pop kind of song, written by Swift and Max Martin Shellback, produced by Max Martin Shellback, on her album, the most recent one called, or not the most recent one, it's the 2017 album Reputation. That's my bad. I thought this was on Lover for a second, but that's my bad. It's actually on Reputation. So obviously a very solid song. Number 9, Havana, Camila Cabello featuring Young Thug. A very good song by one of the rising stars in pop culture and music. The number 1 single off her first album, Camila. The song is obviously a pop and R&B song, released January 12th of 2018. Somebody, I don't know, that was when the album was released. Havana was actually released August 3rd of 2017, but it was obviously one of the best songs of 2018, and it was big on the radio in 2018 as well. 3 minutes and 30 seconds long. Latin pop and R&B. Written by Cabello, Jeffrey Williams, Adam Feeney, Brittany Hazard, Ali Thompson, Brian Lee, Andrew Watt, Pharrell Williams, Louis Bell, and Con Gunsberg, and produced by Frank Dukes. Obviously on her album called Camila. 8th, God's Plan by Drake came out January 19th of 2018. From the album Scorpion, 3 minutes and 18 seconds long, a pop, rap, and trap song written by Aubrey Graham, Ronald Latour, Davion Jackson, Matthew Samuels, and Noah Shabib. Produced by Cardo, Young Exclusive, and Boyda. 7th place, I Like It by Cardi B, Bad Bunny, and J Balvin. A very fun song, which was obviously a remake song of the song I Like It Like That. So, like I said, a very fun and catchy song. off the album Invasion of Privacy. Came out May 25th, 2018. A Latin trap song written by Belcase Almazar, Benito Oscio, Jose Oscorio, Tony Pabon, Jesus Manuel Naives Cortez, Manny Rodriguez, Benny Bonilla, Edgar Mantua, Edgar Vargas, Clanard Raphael, Jordan Thorpe, Luyan Malav, Marcos Macis, Noah Assad, Vincent Watson, Xavier Vargas, and Anthony White, produced by Jay White Did It, Taney, and Craig Kilman, and Invincible. So, a very fun and catchy song there for number 7. Number 6, She Got the Best of Me, Luke Combs, off the album This One's For You Too, came out July 9th of 2018. 3-minute song, country, written by Combs, Rob Snyder, and Channing Wilson, and produced by Scott Moffat. Number 5, Tequila by Dan and Shay, one of the more memorable songs of the year. Off the album Dan and Shay, a country pop song, 3 minutes 16 seconds, written by Dan Smyers, Nicole Gallion, and Jordan Reynolds, and produced by Dan Smyers and Scott Hendricks. 4th place, Shape of You by Ed Sheeran, one of the best songs, obviously, of the year. A song that I feel that would have been number 1 in another random year because of how deep. This song was actually released January of 2017, but wasn't big until 2018. This album came out in 2017, obviously. And this song, like I said, was recorded in 2016, but wasn't big on the radio until 2018, and at the end of 2017. Written by Ed Sheeran, Steve Mack, Johnny McDade, Candy Burris, Tamika Cotty, and Kevin Briggs. Pop, dancehall, tropical house, and produced by Sheeran and Steve Mack. 3rd place, Finesse, Bruno Mars. Obviously, a great song. Off the album 24K Magic. Finesse was released January 4th, 2018. This song features Cardi B. 3.5 minutes long. A New Jack Swing hip hop soul funk song. Bruno Mars, Philip Lawrence, Christopher Brody Brown, James Fauntleroy, Jonathan Yip, Ray Romulus, Jeremy Reeves, Ray McCulloch II, Belcase Almazar, and Clanard Raphael were the songwriters, and the producers, Shampoo, Press and Curl, and The Stereotypes. So, obviously a very good song written by Bruno Mars. Number 2, Perfect, Ed Sheeran. Another song off his 3rd studio album called Divide. This song was released in September of 2017, but was big in 2018. There's obviously a version that's out that he did with Beyonce. This is a very slow and fun and somewhat romantic song, written by Sheeran and produced by Sheeran and Will Hicks. And my number 1 song of 2018, Beautiful Crazy, Luke Combs. Another country song for my number 1 song, and another song by Luke Combs. I think that just says a lot to how talented Luke Combs is. This was released December 3rd, 2018. Country song, obviously, like I said, 3 minutes, 13 seconds. Written by Combs, Wyatt Durrett, and Robert Williford, and produced by Scott Moffat. All right, that's the end of the podcast. I'll be back tomorrow with the latest news related to the coronavirus. We'll preview Masked Singer, Lego Masters, and Celebrity Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And I'll do a 2017 MLB redraft and my top 10 movies of 2018. I hope you guys have a great day, everyone.